Very well. Okay, pues thank you everybody. Welcome. This is the Cinematic, the Catalan Film Festival, starting its last week, full of films to come. But the chat we're having today is about a film that you should have watched already. It's a film that we had this second weekend of the festival, a privilege to have it. And the name is the Year of the Discovery by Luis Lopez Carrasco. And we have a panel to discuss, to talk about the film, and talk about unionism, and talk about the workers' right and how those portrayed through cinema. So we have Tommy Breslin from STUC, Scottish Trade Union Council, Raúl Liarte, the co-writer of the film, Bechaela Walker from the Workers' Educational Association, David Archibald, who's a critic, a lecturer from the University of Glasgow, and an old friend of Cinematic. And we have Fiona, which obviously is most of you will already know. She's been translating and doing the interpretation between Spanish and English for a while for Cinematic. And Alberto and Rafael, at your service. Thank you very much.
The good news is that Rafa and I will vanish in a minute. We won't be talking, so you will be in safe hands. And bear with us, because we train an avant-garde, high-end technological system of live translation. So we will allow pauses in between some answers with the panel. And I very much look forward, obviously, to this mixture of activism and film appreciation, and this follow-up conversation on the Year of the Discovery, for many, the Spanish film of the year. And I look forward to hear your thoughts on the film. No further ado, I hand over to Tommy, who will be our MC for today. Thank you, everyone.
Behave.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, my name's Tommy Breslin. I'm a development officer with Scottish Union Learning, which is the learning and skills arm of the STUC, the Scottish Trade Unions Congress. So absolutely delighted by Cinematic to be invited along here today to chair essentially this panel session. We've got an excellent panel here, but crucially the most important thing was the Year of Discovery, and what an excellent film that was. 3 hours long. There was lots of talking heads, as you'll have seen there, but what a powerful movie. It just really dragged me in, certainly, you know, and I'm really pleased to be part of this panel session. And I'd like to kind of kick off by saying congratulations to Raúl. This film's been winning awards around the world, as we're just picking up. There, you won an award last night, I think, in South America. So congratulations. So we're very privileged to be able to screen this here at the Glasgow Catalan Film Festival with Cinematic. Now, I think Fiona Bailey is here as our translator as well, and I think Alberto may not have mentioned Fiona. So Fiona, thanks for coming here, and we look forward to your very strong and good translations. What we'll do, just to kind of kick things off, I think, is we'll go around the panel and give everybody an opportunity of kind of unpacking some of their feelings around the film and talking a little bit about that. And so without further ado, I think I'd like to pass over to, I'm going to choose the first person I see on my screen there. So David Archibald from the University of Glasgow. David, if you just want to kind of talk a bit for a few minutes about, you know, your interpretation of the film, how you felt about the film, and, you know, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tommy, and thanks to the festival organisers and to the filmmakers for giving me the opportunity to participate in the panel, and also to watch the film itself. We live in funny cinematic times, strange cinematic times, and it's still useful when we have to watch things individually. It's still useful, more than useful, to come together to discuss them as a collective body, rather than just watching films and thinking them through on our own. I think that the film, which I watched in 2 sittings on my laptop in bed over two nights this week, and I would have chewed my right arm off to have been sitting in the front row of the GFT watching that film on the large screen in GFT1 in the main cinema, because although some people might argue that the cinematic involves large landscapes and well-told fictional stories, carefully crafted with strong characters, I think there was something fundamentally cinematic about the film, which was initially just the look of the people in the film itself. So it brought to mind a film by John Cassavetes called Faces, a 1968 film. So you're totally in watching the emotions, every word of some of the characters as there's the man who's arguing, I think if I recall correctly, arguing against the need for unions unless they're going on strike, and he's drinking a long drink, and he's totally he's a completely cinematic experience just to watch his entire face. And it would have been remarkable to have seen that on a large cinema on a large cinema screen. Nevertheless, even to watch that film on a small screen and a tiny laptop, the 11 or 13 inches, the laptop that I have tucked up in my bed in my pajamas, then it remained an absolutely cinematic experience. And the reason for that is not just because of the faces, but also because of the other aspects that I mentioned. So the questions about characterization, which is often related to fictional cinema, and yet the characters are here in this film. We might go on to discuss how much of it's documentary and how much of it's fiction, but nevertheless, the really interesting characterization. And of course, all filmmaking, or certainly a lot of filmmaking, documentary or fiction, is about storytelling. And how many of those people who appeared in the film were magnificent storytellers. So these are some of the reasons that I kind of just at a level of the cinema, why I found that film to be quite a captivating cinematic experience. On the level of the politics, then I thought also it's an unsettling film until you settle into it. So I think that I'm not sure what happens in the film, and I'm delighted that one of the filmmakers is here that Raúl can maybe impart some knowledge to what's actually what we see on the screen, because although it's ostensibly set up as a documentary looking at interviews with material from people who were interviewed in 1992, we very quickly encounter stories that clearly explode ourselves out of 1992. There's at one point, if I recall correctly, there's an old man who talks about voting for or supporting Vox, the Spanish right-wing party, which didn't exist in 1992. And obviously towards the end, as it becomes even more clearer, there's a discussion around Greece and the EU. So initially, I think that you find some of that, like what's going on, until you then just relax into that and just say that what this film is doing is also playing around with temporalities. So it's not just it's not a documentary about 1992. It's not a documentary about workers' stories in relation to fascist trade unions or Franquista trade unions, or a documentary about the current EU positions in relation to specific countries. But it's a film that sort of explodes the kind of linear continuum of history. Marx, as he famously said, argues that what did he say? History is all hitherto existing history is the history of class struggles. But what we get presented here is not one linear history where we get one thing after another, but we get all these struggles, all these campaigns mixed up together in a brilliant cinematic mosaic. And I think that's interesting for how we then think about history. So in many ways, as a piece of cinematic history, then it's a really interesting document, not necessarily a documentary, but a document which helps us to understand the historical process. And as a cinematic film, as a historical film, it invites us to think what history is itself.
Excellent, David. Thank you for that. That was very engaging. We'll come back to some of the points that you're raising there. I think it was interesting about, you know, how the film was presented, but also the politics that sit behind that, and the idea that workers are telling worker stories. You know, essentially, I think was really quite powerful throughout that movie. And I think that kind of leads us nicely into bringing Bechaela in here now. And Bechaela, Workplace Literacies Coordinator with the WA, the Workers' Education Association, and then worked closely with the trade union movement for, you know, since we've both been founded, I think, you know. And I think you're very engaged in working with learners, workers to tell their stories as well. So, Bechaela, I know you've also got a very active interest in film as well. So the same question to you. How did you feel about the film? Is there something you want to talk about for the next few minutes in relation to your experience of watching the film?
Yeah, that was really interesting, David, just listening to your thoughts on the film, and a lot of them don't want to just piggyback on on what you said. But yeah, I think the thing for me about the film is it's a very kind of strange experience because it presents itself like a documentary, but it's got quite a dreamlike quality to it as well. And it opens with a dream, you know, with a man talking about a dream that he's had. And right at the end, there's a fantastic dream that a trade union organiser has where he can't punch. He's trying to punch and he can't do it with any sort of force. And it really just, to me, the whole film kind of brought together all sorts of anxieties and powers, and like just to be involved as an activist, as somebody who's trying to work for change like everybody else here. You know, just how much what we do now is caught up with how we understand history and what our dreams are, but not just our dreams of the future, but what's inside of us, you know, what in our subconscious that comes from our understanding of these past struggles. And I think the film, David, you'll know more how it actually does it technically, but it just it manages to move about like a dream and to help people who are involved in trying to change the world understand. I don't know. I'm not very good at explaining it. I'll be happy to listen to what other people are saying. But yeah, it's a strange kind of dreamlike quality to the whole film. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, it was excellent, Bechaela. Thank you for that contribution as well. You know, and again, we'll come back to some of the ideas that we're unpicking there. Now, I'd like to kind of move on and give Raúl the opportunity to come in. So, Raúl's is a co-writer, as we know, of the Year of Discovery, and he's also actually the waiter in the bar at the start of the film. You know, and it's his dream that kicks things off. So you might recognise Raúl from the start of the film, and is the director Lopez Carrasco. I can't say that as good as Rafael. Unfortunately, I've got that whole Glasgow accent thing going on. But as the director Lopez Carrasco said, he's the heart and soul of this film, and he's always been very close to cooperativism in the city of Cartagena. And he's born and bred in one of the many families working in those shipyards in Cartagena that we heard about. So, Raúl, just handing it over to you if you want to talk for a few minutes about, you know, like how you felt about the whole filmmaking process, how it's been, you know, picked up around the world and been able to screen it here in a virtual environment, albeit in Glasgow.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias a todo el equipo del festival y a los participantes del panel primero por invitarme y por las palabras tan bonitas y agasajadoras que estáis dedicando a la película. Nada, creo que tampoco procede que yo específicamente hable de lo que significa, bueno, sí, tal vez, que significa para mí la peli, pero preferiría, digamos, participar del diálogo, pues si la gente tiene preguntas o también los propios invitados desean saber algo del proceso interno de gestación del film a nivel cinematográfico, o cómo fue la escritura, o cómo fue el proceso de investigación. Estoy aquí para responder con muy buen gusto a todas las preguntas que me hagáis.
I'd be very happy to talk about what the film means to me, but I'd also like to talk about, participate in this discussion. Anything that you'd like to know about the internal, the behind the scenes workings of the film, or the writing, or the research, that would be.
Oh, Rafael, we can't hear you.
Sorry to jump into the meeting like that, into the talk. Fiona, you need to unmute your mic.
Okay, am I?
Sorry, it was too quiet. I didn't have any chance.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
All right, okay.
I was picking you up rather faintly, but I still picked up what you were saying there.
Did you hear the last thing I said?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I repeat that. I'll repeat the last thing Raúl said. I'd be happy to talk about the meaning of the film to me, but I also want to participate in this chat with the panel, and particularly to answer any questions that you might want to know about the behind the scenes or the internal workings of the film, how it was filmed, how we wrote it, or how we researched it.
Okay. Thanks for that, Raúl. I mean, one of the things I found very interesting about it and how the film was kind of presented was that, I mean, since March, I've been working from home. I've been sitting in Zoom meetings that look kind of like this. So actually, sitting watching the film in the way that it was filmed, perhaps unintentionally, was a bit of a prediction of the future in many ways, where so many of us are sitting on screen in front of a computer screen, and we're seeing our friends, we're seeing our work colleagues, and we're seeing other organizations that we negotiate with and work in partnership with. So I thought that aspect was really interesting. And I know David mentioned earlier on about John the director Cavavetti's, and there's some similarities with that film. It reminded him of that film Faces from the 1960s. But it was kind of interesting. How did you land in that type of idea? And how do you see that relating to today? And given the kind of current circumstances, the pandemic circumstances, everything being so virtual, is talking to each other online in this type of a manner, is kind of more or less forgotten about normal phone calls these days. Would you have made the film in the same type of way, or would you change it?
Bueno, creo que no somos tan dueños de cómo hacemos las películas como pensamos. El cine y el cine en España está sujeto, sobre todo este tipo de películas, a condiciones de producción que son muy precarias. Desde el 2000, desde la crisis de 2008, el Estado español o España recortó cantidad de ayudas al cine y de alguna manera se podría decir que hemos hecho la peli como buenamente hemos podido, superando bastantes dificultades. De ahí también que la idea del bar es un lugar que nos interesa, que es un espacio de comunidad, pero también es un lugar que permitía agilizar muchísimo la labor durante el rodaje, porque solo había una localización, ahí podíamos desarrollar toda la narrativa o el arco del guión, y facilitaba mucho las cosas.
So in reality, we weren't really free to make the film as we'd like. We had a lot of conditions that we had to try to work around. Since 2008, there have been quite big cuts to cinema production in Spain. So the film that we ended up making was really the best that we could do in the circumstances that we had. And we chose, for example, we chose the bar because it was a community setting, and it actually made it very easy to film because all the narrative could kind of take place in that one setting. So that's really how we ended up with the film that we made.
And how do you feel about it? I mean, is that, what would have been different had you the funding in place then?
Es una cuestión bastante interesante porque creo que la elección del bar, por un lado, es, aparte de lo que he comentado, también nos permite acceder a esa especie de tiempo suspendido, de tiempo incierto, donde simplemente con el reconocimiento de un lugar viejo, con pegatinas de época, con muebles de época, directamente accedemos a esa especie de tiempo extraño en el que hay una ligera confusión entre el presente y el pasado. Y después, en el sentido del modo de producción, creo tanto Luis como yo, que usar el instrumento del documental nos permite acceder a una forma de hacer cine que es muy interesante para acercarse a este tipo de experiencias, porque políticas o biopolíticas o de lucha, porque nuestro talento como escritores de ficción nunca va a ser tan potente como las propias experiencias de esas personas desnudas colocadas ante la pantalla. Desnudas, digo, colocadas con toda la corporeidad, toda esa parte física. No creo que hubiéramos podido escribir diálogos tan interesantes como lo que finalmente nos dieron las personas que vivieron esa época.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In terms of the bar, it really allowed us to suspend time because it was such an old place, quite strange. It really made this fluidity between the present and the past something we could do. In terms of producing the film, Luis, the director, and I chose to make a documentary because we thought this would allow us to get really close to this idea of the theme of politics and struggle. We also specifically chose the film as it is because we thought we would never be able to write a work of fiction that would be as good as getting real people in front of a camera in that very sort of physical presence. We wouldn't have been able to make up a dialogue that was as good as the fiction, so it probably wouldn't change much.
Además, otra cuestión es que el uso del documental permite juntar dos formas de hacer cine que creo que nos interesan mucho, que es el cine popular, el cine que está cerca de las personas, que habla de las personas, que toma a las personas reales, y también no renunciando a una experimentación, porque a veces cuando se hace cine de ficción hay tantas estructuras, se está un poco como constreñido por el modo de producción, los diálogos, y los creadores, los cineastas o los escritores de películas tienen que renunciar a esa parte experimental. En cambio, con el documental hay un acceso, hay algo como más plural, casi más mestizo.
Also, we specifically wanted to make this as a documentary because it enabled us to link two aspects that were very interesting to us, that of having real people and also being able to introduce a level of experimentation in our filmmaking. I think with fiction, often there's such a sort of constraint of structure and dialogue that the creators have to actually give up some of the creativity to fit in with that. Whereas we found that the documentary genre didn't constrain us so much.
El instrumento del cine documental da acceso a poder emplear lo imprevisto, lo que el talento del cineasta no puede escribir, y la realidad, juntando a varias personas, pensando de qué gente juntar, cómo juntarlas, se genera una vida, una posibilidad de cosas que no estaban previstas, que pueden incorporarse al film. El cine industrial de ficción impone en ocasiones demasiadas reglas y limita.
With a documentary, it allows you to bring in some unforeseen elements because it's reality, and in a setting where you're getting people together, you're going to have some unforeseen outcomes. Whereas in fiction, this doesn't happen because you have lots of rules and you know the outcomes. It's more limited.
Yeah, thanks. That was really an excellent answer there. Thank you. You know, when I was sitting watching the film, there were times that when I was watching it, I was thinking, you know, and you've answered this question essentially, is this scripted and are these actors, you know? But it just sounds so real, and I think there was so much power that it was, you know, it was almost like sitting in a pub or in a cafe or a restaurant with your friends and listening to them, you know, and just sitting back with a glass of beer, you know, a mug of coffee or something, and just letting people tell you stories. You know, I just found it so engrossing in that type of way, and very, very powerful. In fact, you know, I think there was also strong use of silence in the film as well. You know, when there was the police rioting on the streets, you know, and then it went back and showed some of the characters, some of the faces, and everybody was sitting about in the cafe or in the bar, with no sound. It was just the faces there, and yeah, that was pretty powerful. But I think I should maybe hand over to David. David, I mean, do you have any additional questions that you want to? I know you've got some points that you've been discussing with us earlier on today, but do you want to bring some of them to the fore now?
I think we should probably just make more use of Raúl's time and get some insights from him, because you can hear me anytime. But
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, I'm not a person who's is majorly concerned about the fact that the film seems to blur the distinctions between real or documentary and fiction. However, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's
okay. Sorry,
pausing a little bit. Yeah, got you.
However, I do wonder that Raúl uses the word documental. It's a documentary, and the film has majorly been exhibited, I think, in documentary film festivals. So I wonder if he could just say a little bit about the use of the term documentary in that context. I think someone said that, you know, all films are a documentary of their production. You know, so every film in a certain sense is a documentary. But this is a fiction film or a documentary or whatever. You've described it as a documentary, and it's distributing. It's been exhibited on the documentary film festival circuit, but we're sitting here talking to the writer, which is not something that was always the case in a documentary. So I just wonder if you could sort of give us some of your own thoughts on that.
Bueno, al final hay una categoría de cine documental, que es una categoría que depende o que tiene la funcionalidad de establecer una diferencia a la hora de presentar, que los cineastas se presenten ayudas, ¿no? Porque cuando, en España al menos, cuando alguien se presenta una ayuda documental, tiene que presentar un guión que está mucho menos estructurado que cuando se presenta una ayuda de ficción, en la que el guión tiene un peso mayor. Aún así, creo que es importante decir que el cine documental es un cine que se escribe, que tiene un relato y que tiene una puesta en papel, y que, igual que el cine de ficción, requiere de una transposición posterior a una puesta en escena. Igual que hay guiones de ficción que, a la hora de transponerse a escena y hacerse película, no han funcionado, o guiones que eran un poco menos construidos a la hora de llevarse a una puesta en escena de ficción han funcionado mejor, igual ocurre en el documental. Mi experiencia casi, cuando he escrito guión o documental, ahora que estoy escribiendo otro documental, es que el guión de documental requiere ser mucho más preciso, casi más pulcro, porque al no ser actores, estar jugando con una materia humana real, en muchos casos una materia que conoces, con la que tienes una relación afectiva, hay que ser mucho más preciso con las energías que se emplean en set.
We categorize it as a documentary, and part of this is because of the way that these films receive support in Spain. To get financial support for the film, if it's classed as a documentary, then you can submit a script that's less structured than if you're submitting one for a feature film or a work of fiction. So there is a script, even though it's a documentary, we still have to write a script and decide on the scenes. So it's still the process is still created. And like fiction, you can have scripts that are very detailed and ones that are not so detailed. But we found that we ended up working with a script that was really quite well detailed and quite worked upon, and this was because we weren't working with actors, so it was very important that we carefully managed how the participants were going to take part, so that we could manage the energies that were created on set.
De ahí que también haya que intentar pensar que, bueno, que esa categoría de carácter industrial, que es la que muchas veces organiza los festivales, la industria cinematográfica, está viviendo un proceso de apertura en tanto en cuanto el cine documental o las pelis que no son, no digamos cine de documental, perdón, digamos películas que no son absolutamente de ficción, que son mestizas, que son intermedias, que son mitad documental, mitad ficción, están empezando a entrar o a poder tener una ventana en festivales que hasta hace unos años o unas décadas solo admitían películas de ficción. Pero a la vez creo que la herramienta del documental o el documental, como se ha entendido en la historia del cine, como creo que al menos a nosotros nos interesa, también está siendo recogido por la industria televisiva para producir un tipo de narrativa audiovisual que poco se parece al documental que a nosotros nos interesa, es decir, que a veces vacía el documental de problematización, de conflicto, y traslada a los espectadores, hoy en día vemos cantidad de documentales en muchas plataformas, traslada a los espectadores una idea de que eso es netamente real, y el espectador, creo, si queremos hablar de un espectador independiente o casi emancipado, tiene que saber que el hecho de que algo tenga una categoría documental, ya sea en televisión o en cine, no lo transforma ni en real ni en verdadero.
The categorization is also relates to how festivals, film festivals and the film industry work with new releases, and this process is now opening up to more non-fiction films. So I prefer not to call it a documentary. It's more non-fiction, and this is more a mix of documentary and fiction. I've seen that festivals are now starting to open up to this kind of film, whereas before they were really only showing fiction films. We can also see on TV that there are a lot more documentaries being shown. It's a very useful tool for giving a visual narrative, and we see it a lot on TV, and the problem is viewers often think that it's real, and it's really important that that for viewers to realize that what they're seeing is not necessarily real or true.
Thanks. Also, what you were talking about there in terms of energies, there was the energies that from the characters that were in the film were really, really powerful, you know, and there was a lot of touchstones in there as well, I think, you know, and I found that particularly engaging. What I read into the film and watching it was that it was working class people telling working class stories. I thought that was really important. And very often working class stories are not told by working class people. So I felt as though you were given a very strong and very powerful platform to working class people. And you could see those, as you say, you know, the kind of the real stories were far better, far more powerful than what the fiction could possibly have been, you know. And I think that was something that was pretty strong. So that kind of leads me to think about, you know, like how were you able to engage people, convince people to be part of this project? And also then how did those workers that were on the film, how those respondents in the film, the participants, how did they feel about the representation? I mean, have you continued to contact with them? I thought all of that was really, really interesting. I've got another kind of lead-on question that I might come back to again later, but just in the first instance, I think that's...
Tanto Luis y yo, de manera conjunta, realizamos un proceso de investigación, de documentación muy fuerte durante más de 3 años, en el que estábamos entrevistando tanto a protagonistas de la época, a gente sindicalistas, trabajadores del 92, como a chicos jóvenes de la actualidad, que son los que se mezclan al final en la peli. Teníamos acceso a ellos, primero porque yo soy de Cartagena y parte de mi comunidad o de mis amigos, de mi familia, pertenecen a esos chicos, y también porque mi padre específicamente era trabajador del astillero y nos dio acceso a poder llegar a los antiguos trabajadores, algunos ya jubilados, que vivieron en el 92. Hay que decir que en un principio los jóvenes siempre se mostraban más favorables a salir, pero había muchos protagonistas, muchos que vemos en la peli, de los que estaban en las huelgas del 92, que desde el primer momento, por pudor o por no ganar protagonismo, nos dijeron clarísimamente que no iban a salir en el film, que no iban a aparecer en el film.
Yes, Luis, the director, and we spent many years researching this project. We spent about 3 years conducting interviews with trade unionists and workers, and the young people as well that you see particularly at the end of the film. So I had good access to quite a lot of people because I'm from Cartagena, so I kind of used my links with friends and family. And also my dad was a shipyard worker, so through him I was able to access many of the retired shipyard workers. I found that a lot of the young people in the film were really quite keen to be in the film, but we did meet with some resistance from many of those from the 92 era who were adamant that they didn't want to appear in the film.
Pero tuvimos la suerte, o no la suerte, y eso hace referencia un poco a las preguntas que me habéis hecho antes, de si haríamos la peli otra vez de la misma manera. No sé si la haríamos otra vez de la misma manera, pero, por ejemplo, el hecho de tener tantas dificultades para conseguir financiación del film, vernos a mí, que muchos de estos protagonistas del 92 nos vieran a Luis y a mí tristes porque hubo un momento en el que era muy probable que no rodáramos la película, hizo que ellos decidieran romper su pudor y atreverse a salir en la película. De esa manera pues, se dio algo un poco mágico, que es que las dificultades económicas o la dificultad de producción se acabó transformando en la posibilidad de que ellos salieran. A veces en el cine pasan estas cosas mágicas que no necesariamente ocurren en Hollywood ni a base de grandes estudios, sino de fundamentalmente trabajar con las personas, intentar acercarte con ellas con una mirada humilde o humana.
But as luck would have it, and maybe this kind of links to what you asked before, if we would make the film in a different way, if we could do it again, we met with quite a lot of difficulties in getting the film made. And when a lot of these older workers saw just how kind of sad we were, that at one point it didn't look like we were going to make the film, this actually turned their views around, and they said they would take part. So, you know, it's interesting that through these production difficulties, a kind of magic happened, and really our work paid off, because we just tried to, we were trying so hard to connect with all these people to get the film made.
Creo que después también hay otra cuestión que es fundamental, que es que sigue habiendo en la ciudad, en Cartagena, una sensación de que todo lo vivido en aquella época y la transformación, la difícil transformación, lo que produjo la desindustrialización, aparte de los días violentos, toda la reconversión trajo paro, trajo que la ciudad se devaluara, trajo también que muchos barrios entraron en un proceso de empobrecimiento, apareció el narcotráfico, la droga, la heroína. Y hay todavía muchas personas en la ciudad que viven aquellos días y como un trauma, y también creo que eso de alguna manera se conecta con algo que es muy importante y que ha funcionado como caladero para la extrema derecha, que es el autoestima. La gente muchas veces piensa que sus vivencias, lo que han vivido, las experiencias biopolíticas o políticas que han tenido no son interesantes. Y creo que de alguna manera la tarea de los creadores sería acercarse a ellos para transformarlas, ¿no? Para darles ese interés. Y creo que el cine en este caso documental, o el cine mestizo entre lo documental y la ficción, sirven como herramienta para poner en valor todas esas experiencias. Además, hay que decir que mucha de la gente que vive en Cartagena, muchos de los que vivieron eran trabajadores industriales en los 80, en los 90, proceden de zonas rurales. En Cartagena se vivió un proceso de migración muy fuerte en los años 50 que trajo a cantidad de personas campesinas de zonas de alrededor que eran muy pobres porque había una escasez de agua muy fuerte a trabajar en la industria. Y esa gente es la que estuvo formando parte del grueso de los trabajadores. Es decir, que se produce un corte muy claro entre la gente, los trabajadores que vivieron la represión del franquismo, que desaparecen, que están muertos, que se exilian, y los de la segunda ola migratoria, que es la que se produce en los 50, cuando el régimen franquista necesita de nuevo trabajadores para la industria. En este caso, nosotros representamos a los de la segunda ola, no los de la primera, porque los de la primera están muertos, desaparecidos, ya no existen, ya no tienen memoria.
There's an important point that in Cartagena nowadays, people are still experiencing the after effects of what the film shows. Following this period of transformation, of changes in industry, many parts of the city became poor, people had no work, and drugs became a big problem. So people nowadays are still almost living in a trauma linked to that time. They often, I think people there have this lack of self-confidence, and this might be linked with the rise of the right-wing politics there. Some people lack self-confidence in that they feel that their experiences in their lives aren't really interesting. And as filmmakers, we really wanted to get close to them, and this type of the mixture of the documentary and fiction film that I've mentioned is a tool to be able to shed light on their experiences. Many people who travel to this area actually came from rural zones. There was a large migration during the 50s, and lots of the people from the countryside are the ones that ended up in these industries in Cartagena, and they became the workers that were in the film. So there were really two waves of of migrants from the rural areas. The first were more under the Franco regime, and they've now died or disappeared. They don't have that memory to give. But the second wave of migrants who then traveled into these industrial areas, they're the ones featured in the film.
Thank you. And we've got a question coming in here from Alberto. I'm not sure how we're going to manage this, Alberto. You got an audience question there? Yeah.
Whoop.
Hi.
I was just texting Rafa to bring us on. We have a couple of audience questions that we can put to the panel. Before that, because I think it's kind of related to what we're talking about, I wanted to ask Raúl and all of you, David, Bechaela, on this concept of working class representation on screen. We've seen a lot of something that Raúl was saying before, of fiction archetypes, of the classic journeys, hero kind of structures of cinema imposed in stories of, workers or working class heroes, if you say. And I think something that I love of this film is the length it takes, is the level of detail to the importance of the micro, of the everyday life of these characters, rather than, some very typical dramatic structure or very, or a classic hero's journey or anything like that. You use the everyday life of these people in this bar to build up this monumental film, to then build up these massive implications of the film. I don't know, in general, to the panel, if you think about that sometimes conflicting relationship between cinema and working class representation. What Raúl was saying, I think is very important. We see fewer cases of filmmakers working in a cooperative, collaborative way with a group of team. Faces, and John Cassavetes is one, but you see it rarely. You see often fiction structures imposed. So I don't know if the whole panel, starting with Raúl, could tell us something about this.
Bueno, existe una tradición que se podría enlazar casi desde una parte del cine soviético vinculada a la época de Stalin o al cine del este, y a otra del cine hollywoodiense, en el que en ocasiones se ha intentado trasladar desde del cine de ficción en mayúsculas una idea de los trabajadores como casi héroes, ¿no? Como héroes, hombres hechos muchas veces para la guerra, para la expansión de un Estado-nación, para representar un país a través del deporte, de una forma de masculinidad muy fuerte, muy clásica, a través del sacrificio también. Y creo que de alguna manera esta peli es todo lo contrario.
Yeah, there's a cinematic tradition really going back to the Soviet times under Stalin, and even in Hollywood, and the way it portrays in fiction the idea of workers as heroes. There may be sort of men of war helping to build a nation state, or they are sporting characters with this very particular type of masculinity and an air of sacrifice about them, whereas this film is the complete opposite.
Es completamente lo contrario, porque de alguna manera nos parecía interesante intentar arriesgar, aun pudiendo habernos equivocado, intentar transmitir que estas personas que estuvieron en esos procesos, que lucharon, que pelearon, que se vincularon, no se sienten héroes ni creen que hicieran algo extraordinario, sino que es la propia condición de clase, la propia condición de ser de clase trabajadora, la que de alguna manera históricamente te obliga a luchar. De ahí que también con la película queríamos intentar crear un arco de todas las formas de resistencia que van desde el siglo XIX casi con la Primera República Española, pasando por la Guerra Civil, la resistencia antifranquista y después la desindustrialización. También intentando traer nuevas formas de lucha actuales, de emancipación, como podía ser el feminismo. Pero que todo se hiciera de una manera tranquila, humilde, sincera y sin un heroicismo ni con ningún tipo de sacrificio mesiánico. La lucha está en la cotidianidad, igual que está tomarse un café, comer, ir al trabajo, disfrutar del sol, vivir la vida en comunidad. Era nuestra idea.
Okay. So yes, as I said, this film is the opposite, and we maybe took a risk, but what we felt we had to do was show that people who fight and struggle don't necessarily feel like they're heroes or like they've done anything extraordinary, and that really the very nature of being working class is linked to having to struggle. We really wanted to touch on themes about resistance, because this is run through Spain from the days of the Republic and Franco, and then this in deindustrialization. And we also wanted to touch on struggles like feminism. So we wanted to do it in a very to show struggle as in a very sincere form, and not in a messianic kind of way. And that struggle is can be in how you live the day to day and how you live in your community.
Yeah, I thought Miranda was a very strong character at the start of the film. I thought she was excellent. You know, you certainly want Miranda on your side. You know, there's no doubt about that. And I think that question that you're asking there, Alberto, as well, is related to some of the work that Bechaela's engaged in. You know, around this gathering of worker stories and telling worker stories. And it'd be interesting to hear Bechaela's perspective.
Yeah, I think that workers, I mean, in lots of films, work is just completely absent. You know, even if there's workers in them, they're not working, and the workplace is quite often absent in television and films, and then, I mean, a lot of the work that's happened with the Workers' Educational Association in Glasgow over the last 6 months, we've had tutors trying to help learners write some work about their experience of the pandemic, because there's a project called the Worker Stories Project, and they're collecting experiences of the pandemic, so that it can be archived and recorded, so that we don't, you know, yet again just have this story told from a position of power. But I think it's kind of, I mean, Raúl touched on it a little bit, the difficulty of making the film, the material conditions, and how that shapes what the film is like. And I'd be interested to just hear a bit more about that. I think it's quite interesting with writing that all you need is a pen, and yet still workers' voices just aren't heard enough, because of the whole publishing industry. It's so dominated by upper middle class white people who just shape what gets listened to. And I think that's something about this film that's so striking, is, you know, for 3.5 hours we just listen to workers' voices, and it really feels like the whole. And again, it would be nice to hear a bit about the process of making the film, but I would imagine if you were involved in that film that you would just feel really listened to. Yeah, so I think it's really important that we provide spaces for you know, for our stories to be heard. I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Bechaela, and I'm curious to hear David's opinion as well on these traditions of you know, constantly conflicting.
Hello.
Relationship.
Yeah, Alberto, you just paused there a wee second. Your net connection dropped.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no, yeah, I was just saying that
I think I got the gist, but Alberto, I think that the labour movement, in my view, and it crosses over into cinema, has obviously campaigned a lot for the right to work. So, and what you get in cinema is often, cinematic representations whereby workers are like campaigning for work, campaigning for better conditions at work, and so on. But rarely do we get films which explore why should we work. And just to make a little detour just into a kind of Scottish example, but there's a filmmaker called Peter McDougall, whose films are quite famous in Scotland, but he has I think what his film shows the alienating consequences of labour under capitalism. And I think that what we need, and I raise that because I think that he's having a different discussion just in we need jobs because jobs give us dignity and so on. So what I'm arguing for is a polyphony of voices, for a whole series of voices from different workers to be heard, rather than just the singular, which brings me back to this film, because I think what you get in this film is, rather than the singular, often middle-class voice articulating what they think working class people should hear, or what working class people think, then what you get on the screen is the articulation of different views of working class people about work and about struggle. And some of them we actually might not want to hear, or they might make us uncomfortable. So there's the old man and so on who talks about being in the Frankista trade union. But what the film does is it gives this, establishes a polyphony of voices, a dialogical process. And of course, that's what we need more of. What we need more of is more working class voices telling more working class stories. And certainly what we need less of, even if I say that from the university, my university office, is we need less middle class people telling stories about working class people.
And we have someone, Raquel, in the chat asking a really good question on what David is saying too, and something that we were touching. There is, let me first, because there's a greeting, so I want to get it right. Raquel is saying, "Hola, Raúl. Congratulations to the whole cast and crew. What is the significance?" We were touching on these everyday moments and small moments, and she's very curious about the significance of portraying these characters in moments of silence, while they work, while they're lost in thoughts. If you could tell us more about that. And another question from Raquel too, that is more specific on the issue of the split screen, on why and how it came about.
La pantalla dividida fue un recurso que se encontró, que encontraron Luis y Sergio Jiménez durante el proceso de montaje. Y a la vez tiene, creo, en esa búsqueda que se produce en el montaje, que es, se puede decir, la fase más... La segunda fase de intelectualización, o la segunda fase de reescritura del film, después de la escritura del guión, se dieron cuenta de que para generar esa especie de sentido de voces contrapuestas, de voces plurales de mucha gente en un bar, la pantalla partida permitía acceder a varias conversaciones a la vez y ser como una especie de voyeur, como cuando en un bar así español, con mucho griterío, mucha gente, puedes pasar horas solo y mirando de reojo, colocando el oído para descubrir conversaciones que pueden ser muy interesantes, incluso más interesantes de la que puedes estar teniendo contigo mismo o con la persona que te pueda acompañar. Creíamos que la pantalla partida daba acceso a esa especie de pluralidad o de casi, por momentos, caos. Hay como algunas escenas muy frenéticas que representan esa forma de vida tan comunitaria, como por ejemplo el aperitivo cuando la gente está comiendo, y ahí la pantalla dividida cumple una función interesante. Ahora contesto la siguiente pregunta del silencio.
The split screen was really the resource that Luis, the director, and others on the team found while they were looking at the filming process. So this really came in the second phase after the initial script was written. This was kind of the second working of the script. We realized that to generate this idea of a kind of plurality and different layers of speech, the split screen lent itself really well to this. And we like the idea that in a Spanish bar, you can often spend hours alone just eavesdropping and seeing what other people are chatting about. And the split screen just gave us this sense of plurality, and sometimes it was a bit chaotic, and frenetic, for example, in the scene where people are eating. And now I'll answer the next question.
El tema de las pantallas, de la pantalla en silencio, la pantalla en silencio, perdón, de los rostros en silencio, está muy vinculada también a la decisión de que la gente o que los participantes contaran un sueño, porque igual que el sueño da acceso a una forma de inconsciente, a una posibilidad de narrarte a ti mismo desde un lugar en el que en ocasiones no quieres verte, donde se esconden traumas o cosas que cuesta sacar a la luz, cuando un rostro se coloca en silencio también está comunicando muchas cosas, está hablando de experiencias, de lugares, de, no sé, de algo muy, muy carnal, muy físico. Además, la película es una película que niega el paisaje de la ciudad. El espectador que ve la película no se puede hacer una idea de cómo es Cartagena, porque no la ve, porque la peli se desarrolla entera en un bar. De hecho, solo salimos al exterior cuando ocurren los disturbios. De ahí que esa especie de idea de dejar justo después de los disturbios rostros en silencio daba una sensación de que el paisaje de la peli, más allá del archivo, van a ser solo los rostros de las personas. En los rostros de las personas están las marcas de la experiencia, de la historia. Y creemos que eso era importante y funcionaba.
In terms of silence, this was linked to the theme of dreaming and the subconscious, and that within us we can all have some hidden traumas. So silence was important because it still communicates experiences, places, but it does so in quite a carnal, physical way. Linked to this is the fact that we decided not to show the city itself. It all takes place in the bar, apart from when we see the disturbances. And after these disturbances, we used silence in the film because we really felt the silences were almost like an archive. So the silences would be what marked the history of what these people went through. It's all in their faces. So we thought was very important, and it works as a technique too.
And it's part of what we were saying. It's about that daily life struggle, and those are the moments that in a fiction film you cut and leave out, and are even more important here for that atmosphere and take you to that bar. Following on comments from audience, this is more a comment than a question, Raúl, but has the structure, the film has the structure of a good fiction and the feel of a good documentary, quite a unique film. Charles is saying that one of the nice things is the way that you allowed juxtaposition in the points of view. Sometimes even in the same conversation, I remember two ladies that start in A criticizing B to finish saying B, that kind of journey in the same conversation, very Spanish. But Charles was saying, that he was keen with that, allowing that contradiction. Great, if you can comment on that plurality. And he was also curious, in particular, about the happenings of the burning of the parliament and the different points of view from the police than from the workers, no? So he was asking us about that.
Sí, es verdad lo que planteabais, que quizás la primera hora de la película, que es la primera hora en la que no se habla de nada específico, sino que es una especie de fresco, de cuadro, de foto en movimiento en el que se van viendo pedazos de vida de esa clase trabajadora, es como un poco la parte más torcida de la película. Tal vez la más imperfecta, pero a la vez a mí, a título personal, es mi parte favorita. Porque creo que es importante, como bien planteabais, permitir que el cine acceda a esos momentos de cotidianidad, a la fiesta, al disfrute, a las conversaciones en apariencia poco importantes, pero que están diciendo mucho de las condiciones de vida, del carácter, de cómo son las personas, de cómo usan el lenguaje, antes de entrar al tema del conflicto, de la reconversión y del Parlamento. Aún sabiendo que quizá esa primera hora de película ha sido una hora que en algunos festivales o para algunos programadores o para algún público es condenatoria, es negativa, es como la primera hora que te saca de la película. Es algo que mucha gente me dice. Pero creo que había que hacer ese ejercicio de arriesgar y colocarla y asumir que tenía que estar y que tenía un sentido narrativo neto para entender toda la peli en su conjunto.
Yeah, the first hour of the film is really quite a general chat amongst the characters. It's kind of like a moving photo or like a snapshot. So in a way, it's quite a sort of imperfect aspect of the film, but it's actually my favorite because it gives this film access to the day-to-day. And even though people may be chatting about things that don't seem that important, we're actually finding out about life, about the characters and what kind of language they use. And once this is established, then after that first hour, we move into the section that deals more with conflict and what happened at the Parliament. So that first hour of the film, some people didn't like it or were a bit negative about it, but we thought it was a risk worth taking to include that hour just because it sets the scene so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Al respecto del tema de la pluralidad, sí que hubo debates, o Luis y yo estuvimos conversando largo y tendido sobre cuántos discursos podíamos llegar a recoger sobre la reconversión industrial, porque siendo un tema que estaba muy poco explorado en España, no hay muy poca investigación, tanto académica como en forma de novela o en forma de película, estábamos moviéndonos sobre un terreno nuevo y no sabíamos dónde colocar el límite o el acotamiento para recoger discursos sobre la época. Al final el límite vino impuesto por una cuestión de producción, pero en ese deseo de reconocernos investigando, retratando un momento que está muy poco trabajado, acabamos haciendo una peli muy larga, porque creemos que al final los procesos políticos del neoliberalismo, de las políticas que generan desigualdad, pobreza, no solo afectan a una generación, no solo afectan a la generación que la vive, sino que genera una resiliencia negativa que se prolonga durante décadas. De la necesidad de no dejar o intentar recoger el máximo de discursos en número y en pluralidad. Y también asumir que había una parte de la representación del Estado, como es la policía, que sí o sí tenía que estar. Aunque conseguir el testimonio del policía fue algo realmente muy complicado.
In terms of plurality, we had some long chats about how many characters' discussions we needed to include, particularly about the industrial change in the region. It's really something that's not talked about much in that region. So we were kind of on new ground, but we didn't know where to draw the line, but in actual fact, it became more a matter of production that put limits on what we could include. But it's strange that having touched on something that's not really discussed a lot, it ended up being such a long film. And this was really because we felt we wanted to look at this concept of neoliberalism and how it's resulted in inequality and poverty, not just at that time, but that this has been prolonged for many decades now. So we really wanted to, in terms of plurality, include the maximum number of people we could talking about it. And that also included having a member of the police talking, although to get that person's involvement, it was very complicated for us.
And I don't know, I feel like we should leave Charles the mystery of who says the truth, the police or the workers. You know, why reveal which version is the good one? Better leave it like that. That's the question that I think you can see there. But maybe we can leave it like that. I know we're running over time a little bit, so I might start to maybe hand again to Tommy for finalizing comments, questions. I think you touched on some of the remarkable things of the film, David, when you were saying that community aspect and cinematic aspect in the beginning, that you made us feel a group of people, fairly group of people here in Scotland, UK this weekend. But I leave it to you to conclude.
Well, if I was just to throw in some of my concluding remarks again, it was just to congratulate Raúl and his colleagues on an excellent piece of work, and I'm sure it'll continue to grow in popularity and there'll be more audiences who'll get access to that, and I think that's great. And wouldn't it be great if it did get, I think, as Bechaela was mentioning earlier on, better exposure through more mainstream channels, and I think that would be really, really interesting, and also I like to kind of juxtaposition between what was presented in terms of the dialogue and the backdrop to what was going on in Spain in 1992, and it talked about Expo 92, and it talked about the Olympics in Barcelona, and that kind of idea of this fig leaf, this public image it's trying to be projected by politicians and businesses and other corporations, while actually the reality for many workers is something that's is quite different from that public image, and that's something we've always got to be aware of, and we can see that today as well, and we can translate that into today's context. I think that's absolutely essential and important, and I think the final message I walked away with was that there's this idea of international solidarity, and that the struggle continues, and that continues for all of us, and we've got to continue to organise, and we've got to continue to work with artists like yourself, to be able to explore and expose working class people's stories with it, and yeah, thanks to Cinematic for being part of this, and I'll just pass it on. I think Bechaela next, if you want to kind of have some concluding remarks.
Yeah, thanks for having me along, and it was really interesting hearing what everybody had to say about the film, and like Tommy was saying, I just think it's vitally important that we keep on hearing from working class people and trying to make space so that this, because I think that culture just shapes so much what happens, and it's happened in Glasgow with the Commonwealth Games. They try and use art to back up what's going on. They drag the artists in to kind of, whitewash people's houses getting knocked down to, to make car parks and things like that. And it happened with the, Tommy, you'll maybe remind me what it was called, but like there was my memory's terrible, but in the 1990s in Glasgow, we had a big cultural project to make Glasgow more kind of profitable. And there was a group of artists who really resisted that. And their work now is a great source for other artists to draw on. And it's kept that story alive of the resistance to trying to basically turn the whole city into a company, which is an ongoing process that we don't have time to get into just now. But yeah, so thanks so much for making such a great film.
Thanks, yeah. And I've got to say thanks as well to Fiona for doing some excellent translation there. I mean, I think you've got the toughest job in the panel this evening as well. But David, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Just thanks for inviting me along. Thanks to the filmmakers for making such a magnificent film and allowing us to talk about it. I mean, I think it's absolutely imperative that at some point in the not too distant post-vaccine situation that we have an actual physical screening of the film. I mean, there's a cinema here in the university we could perhaps use if there was no. So I'm offering that cinema, but we could obviously use somewhere a commercial cinema somewhere else, which might be more plush. But I think it's imperative that we have another screening. With the actual. The great thing about that is the communality of people in the same room. So to have a physical screening in Glasgow and celebrate our own kind of communism of bodies in the room, and then to talk about it would be great. So let's do that.
That's Rafa writing, but I think I was going to say I speak for both. You have our commitment, and thankfully GFT commitment too was we don't want to cancel these slots whenever it's possible. I think that the commitment is to make that happen. Since we saw this film in Rotterdam, it was like we need to bring this film to people in Glasgow. It was great to share this weekend, but I think the commitment is still there to show the film in Glasgow with people in the room, to go into the pub afterwards to talk about this film. Raúl knows, Luis knows, the threat is there. We told them, you think the noise of a Spanish bar is unique, so you need to come here and hear the noise of a Glasgow pub to challenge that notion of uniqueness. And also, they fit very well. Raúl fits very well in a Spanish bar, but I want to see him in a Scottish pub, in a counter with a good pint. So you have our word from Cinematic that we will try to make that happen in a post-vaccine future. So, but thank you.
That'd be excellent. And I would just say, I liked your term earlier on, David, about collectivising cinema. That's something we try to do with online learning as well. I think that idea of collectivising, discussing the important points and giving the filmmaker an opportunity, giving the filmmaker a platform and the audience to be able to start to talk and encourage dialogue, I think that was crucial. So thanks to all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Raúl. We hope to see you in Scotland soon with a scotch, with a pint, with Luis, without Luis, whatever. And the last thanks is to the legend Fiona, because she did a remarkable work.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.